this week we made a succulent cake. I started by making a vanilla cake and I tried to bake it in a glass bowl, but when that didn't work, we switched to our trusty box mixers and baked 2 8-inch round cakes and 1 7-inch round. After I baked them, I let them cool completely, leveled them just so they were missing the dome at the top and they had a really flat top. I didn't have any exact measurements for that. And then I wrapped them in some cling wrap and froze them overnight. I then made some buttercream with 500 grams of butter and 1 kilo of icing mixture. I know it seems like a lot, but we need a whole lot of buttercream for this cake. So after mixing the buttercream, I divided it into, I took about a quarter out and dyed it with some red, some brown and some yellow to make a terracotta pot kind of colour. I took a little baby pot that I had next to me just for reference, and I kept putting that next to the icing just to make sure that I was getting the right colour. I then took that terracotta and I spread it onto my cakes in between the layers and stacked them up. The important part about this that I should tell you is that I did it upside down. So I did the 2 8-inch cakes first and then the 7-inch on top, because I find it easier when I'm carving to carve from the bottom out if I'm making a kind of slanted shape. But if you find it easier to go from the top down, by all means you do that. But yeah, so I flipped it over just to make the carving easier for me. So I carved that, mostly carving off of the middle layer to create a kind of pot shape. I didn't want the slant to be hugely severe, I just wanted it to link up between the 7-inch and the 8-inch. This was basically just because I kind of wanted it to look more like one of those hanging pots that you hang from the roof, rather than a pot that would sit on the ground. So I went through and I did that, and then I covered it in a really thin crumb coat all the way around, nothing on the top, nothing on the bottom, and then I put it on the plate that it was on in the freezer for about 15 minutes to set completely, to stop any crumbs from getting into the outer coat. So while that was in the freezer, I took the rest of my buttercream and I divided it into 6 bowls. 5 of those I coloured with greens and 1 I coloured yellow. So with the greens, I only used 1 tube of green kind of colouring, but I was using different amounts and different base kind of colours as well. So I would do a little bit of green in one to make a light green, a lot in another to make dark green. I put some black in to make a grey base green. I put some blue in and some red in and made all sorts of different colours. This is the part that I think that you can get the most creative with. You make any kind of green because there are so many different types. Really, it's basically up to you what colours you want, how many different colours you want, and how you want to mix them. Just a quick note for my yellow, I did add a little bit of red to make it a more of a mustardy kind of softer yellow as opposed to a vibrant yellow. That's just because I thought that was more suited to a succulent colour than the kind of bright yellow. So I set those aside. So I put the buttercream on the top with an offset spatula. And then I noticed that because I'd been icing it upside down on a plate, there were a few gaps around the bottom. What I did find is that it was a bit rough on the edges and it wasn't quite looking as smooth as I would have liked it to. So I went around with my finger and just smoothed it all out. And that's the kind of thing that you need to not be afraid of when you're baking, even if it's for people that you don't know. As long as your hands are clean, you can pretty much get away with wiping it with your finger, because when you think about it, you probably have more control of what's right on your hand than, like, say, a spatula or something else. So I covered that completely with a thick coat of the terracotta and put that back into the freezer to set up completely. I then took my coloured buttercreams and I started making my succulents. This part as well as the colours of the greens can be something where you go completely crazy with your creativity. You can make any kind of succulent with any kind of piping tip, any kind of piping bag cutout shape that you want to make. It's really about trying what you want to do and then seeing how it works out. So I'll just show you some of the ones that I did for my cake. I started off by using a leaf tip, which just has pretty much a triangle out of it. I used this and I made a little mound on top of my flour nail and some squares of baking paper, with the tip facing so it looks like it's going to eat the buttercream as opposed to it lying down on top of the nail. So I went through and I pulled them out and I just made a classic kind of leaf shape all around the bottom. I pulled out all of the leaves around the bottom row, and then as I moved up I angled it a bit differently and then pulled out so that it was more standing up and kind of looked like it was opening a bit like a rosebud or something like that. The important part about this is the consistency of your buttercream and the control that you have over the piping bag. If you're pulling too hard, it can tear the buttercream and lose the leaf shape completely. And if the buttercream is too soft, it won't hold the shape at all. So this goes back to when you make the buttercream. Perhaps add a little bit less milk than you think you would usually add, or add a little bit more of the icing sugar depending on the consistency that you need. So I did that with all sorts of different colours, and then I then took a different piping bag and I cut a V out of that as well to make it look like a larger leaf tip. This of course you can do if you don't have a leaf tip, and you can just make it smaller and bigger to give more variety in the sizes. So I just did a darker colour in this kind of wider leaf tip and pulled that out in exactly the same style, it just came out a bit bigger. I just did that because I kind of wanted to look a bit more juicy, I guess. I then moved on to a petal tip, which is, it's a bit of a teardrop kind of shape, and I used the fatter end as opposed to the skinny end, which is what you would use when you're usually making a flower. I made a mound, as always, which I do with all of the succulents, and then I made a little bit of a kind of kick with the piping bag, and then just went around closing it off so it kind of looked like a rosebud, but not quite because it was a bit fatter, and because it's fatter and it looks a bit more full, it looks less like a flower and more like a succulent. With the petal tip I also used the skinnier side to create kind of ribbony effect, so it looked a bit more like a blossom kind of shape. And I also used a tiny bit of terracotta and I smeared that on the pointier side of the tip, made that so that and then filled the rest of the bag with green, a different shade of green. I did a couple of them I think, and then I just did exactly the same kind of blossom style all the way around and building up to give the succulent a bit more of like a burnt kind of look, and again give more variety. I then used a tip that was a bit more of like a line kind of tip. It was pretty flat, and I just made a large circle in the center and then was pulling out to create a really big open kind of intricate looking succulent. So I put all of those onto a baking tray and refrigerated them for about 15 minutes so that they would hold their own shape, and then when I wanted to transfer them onto the cake they would be a lot easier to handle as one piece. So I put them in the fridge and then took my cake out of the freezer, and then found that around the top edges I had a few gaps or holes. So I went through, added some extra buttercream, completely iced the top, and then I went through with my finger around the edges just to kind of clean it up and make it look a bit more flush so that it all looks like one piece. So after my succulents had finished refrigerating, I pulled them out and started placing them on the top of the cake. I made sure that it was completely balanced with colours and styles that I had all over the cake, but again, it's completely up to you on pretty much how you would lay out a pot of succulents yourself. I did make sure to leave some gaps though, because I had some extra piping tips, some star piping tips, one large one with a whole lot of teeth and one smaller closed one, as well as some chocolate rocks to fill in the rest of the pot. So after I did that, I went through and I went with my extra piping bags that I was piping on top of the cake. I just did that for a little bit more control, and I kind of grouped those a bit more together because I knew when I was choosing those tips and the style that was going to come out of them that I wanted them to be the smaller kind of grouped together parts of the pot. So I put them all on top. Some of them were coming down the sides, some were piling on top of each other to create a bit more height. It was all a bit about making more dimension. I put my chocolate rocks around the edges and then took some white royal icing and piped some little flowers on top of the closed star tip piped one to make them look like a cactus that was flowering. So that's pretty much it for what I did for my cake, but of course whatever you want to do, if you want to add more, if you want to do less, it is completely up to you, and you can let your creativity run wild with this pretty much. So that's it for the video for this week. I really hope that you enjoyed watching it as much as we enjoyed making the cake. Make sure you comment down below and give this video a thumbs up to let us know that that's what you want. If you want to see more from me, make sure you hit subscribe. Check out all of my social media, the links will be right next to me, and my previous videos will be down below. And also, let us know what you think of this new credits scene thing. We're just trying something new. Alright, I'll see you next time. Bye!